My son texted, "We just want a peaceful Christmas with the family. Don't come." I replied, "Enjoy." They had no idea I was hiding a fortune of $8 million. When my guests posted photos on social media, my phone rang 53 times. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking my morning coffee, and watching the snow fall outside when my phone buzzed. A text from Anthony. My heart did that little flutter it always did when I heard from my son, even at 65, even after all these years of disappointment. "We just want a peaceful Christmas with the family. Don't come." I read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Don't come. To Christmas. The Christmas I'd been planning for months, buying gifts, preparing recipes, imagining my grandchildren's faces when they opened their presents. My hands started shaking. Not the gentle tremor that sometimes came with age, but the violent shake of someone whose world had just tilted off its axis. I set the phone down on the scratched wooden table and stared at those words until they blurred. 28 years of Christmas mornings. 28 years of getting up at 5 a.m. to start the turkey, of setting the table with my grandmother's china, of making sure everything was perfect for my family. And this is how it ends, with a text message. I picked up the phone and typed back with fingers that wouldn't quite obey me. "Have fun." 2 words. That's all I could manage without falling apart completely. The silence in my small apartment felt suffocating. I looked around at the Christmas decorations I'd put up 3 weeks ago. The small tree in the corner, decorated with ornaments my grandchildren had made over the years. The stockings hanging from my makeshift mantel, each one carefully embroidered with a family member's name. Even Anthony's wife Jessica had a stocking, though she'd never once thanked me for anything I'd done for their family. I remembered last Christmas, how Jessica had rolled her eyes when I brought out the photo albums, how she'd whispered something to Anthony about living in the past when I tried to share stories about his childhood, how my own grandchildren, Emma and Jake, barely looked up from their phones when I spoke to them. But I kept trying. I always kept trying. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion itself. It was the casual cruelty of it. "We just want a peaceful Christmas." As if I was some kind of disruption, some unwelcome chaos they needed to avoid. As if 40 years of single motherhood, of working 2 jobs to keep them fed and clothed after their father died, of sacrificing every dream I'd ever had, meant nothing. I walked to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Underneath my winter sweaters was a wooden box I hadn't touched in months. Inside were letters from Anthony when he was in college, thanking me for the care packages, for the money I'd sent when he was broke, for always believing in him. Letters from when Emma was born, telling me what an amazing grandmother I was going to be. When had it all changed? When had I become the burden instead of the blessing? I think it started when Anthony married Jessica. She came from money, real money, and suddenly my little apartment wasn't good enough. My homemade gifts seemed cheap next to her family's expensive presents. My stories about Anthony's childhood became embarrassing instead of endearing. I became the poor relation they had to tolerate out of obligation. But I tolerated it because I loved them, because family was supposed to stick together no matter what. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Anthony had realized how cruel his message was. Maybe he was calling to apologize. It was my neighbor, Margaret. "Anne, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but Charles and I were wondering if you'd like to join us for Christmas dinner tomorrow. The Weatherbys are coming, and the Astors. We'd love to have you. Margaret and Charles lived in the penthouse of our building. I'd helped Margaret once when she'd locked herself out, and we'd become friendly over the past year. I knew they traveled in wealthy circles, but they'd never made me feel less than for living in a modest 1-bedroom apartment. I don't want to impose," I said automatically, though something inside me was already saying yes. "Nonsense. We're having it catered by Le Bernardin, and honestly, we could use someone with your warmth there. Some of Charles's business associates can be rather stuffy." Le Bernardin. I'd read about that restaurant in magazines, the kind of place I'd never dreamed of eating at. "What should I bring?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just yourself, dear. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 8. And Anne? Dress up. It's quite a formal affair. After I hung up, I stared at myself in the hallway mirror. 65 years old. With graying hair, I colored myself and clothes from department store sales. What was I thinking? Accepting an invitation to dine with millionaires. But then I remembered Anthony's text, the casual dismissal. The assumption that I would just quietly disappear from their lives whenever it was convenient. Maybe it was time to stop making myself small for people who didn't appreciate what I had to offer. I walked to my closet and pulled out the black dress I'd bought for Anthony's wedding but never worn again. It still fit mostly. I'd wear my mother's pearl necklace, the one piece of jewelry I owned that looked expensive. As I hung the dress on the closet door, my phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from my daughter-in-law. Thanks for understanding. The kids are excited for a quiet Christmas with just us. I deleted the message without responding. Tomorrow, while they were having their peaceful Christmas, I'd be dining with people who actually wanted my company. For the first time in hours, I smiled. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. Maybe it was the finality of Anthony's rejection, or maybe it was the prospect of spending Christmas somewhere I was actually wanted, but something had shifted inside me during the night. I made my coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. For the first time in months, I logged into my investment account, the one Anthony had no idea existed. 8,247,332s. 18. I stared at the number on the screen, the same number I'd been staring at for the past 3 years since Aunt Helen died. My father's sister, the one who'd never married and had made a fortune in tech stocks back in the 70s. The one who'd left everything to me because, as she'd written in her letter, "You're the only one in this family who knows the value of hard work." I'd kept it secret, all of it, because I'd wanted Anthony to make his own way in the world, to learn the value of money the way I had. Because I'd thought if he knew I was wealthy, he'd never respect me as anything more than a bank account. How wrong I'd been. He didn't respect me anyway. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those years of him borrowing money from me, $50 here, $200 there. The time he'd asked for $5,000 to help with Emma's school fees, promising to pay me back but never mentioning it again. The way he'd sigh when I couldn't afford to take the grandchildren to Disney World, or when I'd show up to their birthday parties with homemade gifts instead of the latest expensive toys their other grandmother brought. Jessica's mother, Patricia, who never let anyone forget that she'd bought Emma's first car, paid for Jake's summer camp, funded their family vacation to Europe. Patricia, who got the seat of honor at every family gathering while I was relegated to helping in the kitchen. I'd let it happen because I'd thought it was the right thing to do. Stay humble. Don't spoil them with money they hadn't earned. Teach them values. But what values had they learned? That it was acceptable to treat me like a second-class citizen, that my love and sacrifice meant nothing compared to Patricia's checkbook? I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom closet. Behind my winter coats, in a garment bag I hadn't touched in years, was a red silk dress. Designer. I'd bought it on impulse 5 years ago, telling myself I'd wear it to some special occasion. But there had never been a special occasion worth celebrating. Until now. I tried it on, and it fit better than I remembered. The color brought out the warmth in my brown eyes, made my gray hair look distinguished instead of tired. I looked like someone with secrets, someone worth knowing. The afternoon passed slowly. I did my hair, painted my nails, applied makeup with more care than I'd taken in years. At 5:30, I slipped on the dress and my mother's pearls and looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I looked like money, old money, the kind of woman who belonged in penthouses and private clubs, which, I realized with a start, I was. At exactly 6 o'clock, I knocked on Margaret and Charles's door. Charles answered, elegant in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw me. "Anne, you look absolutely stunning," he said, taking my hand and leading me inside. Their penthouse was everything my apartment wasn't. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, crystal chandeliers, artwork that I suspected wasn't reproduction. And the people. I recognized some of them from the society pages, though I'd never imagined I'd be in the same room with them. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet our dear friend Anne," Margaret announced, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. She's the one I was telling you about, the one who's been such a wonderful neighbor. The evening unfolded like something from a movie. I found myself deep in conversation with Eleanor Astor about her charity work with literacy programs. I discussed art with a museum curator. I even held my own in a debate about economic policy with a former hedge fund manager. It wasn't just that they were treating me as an equal, it was that I felt like one. For the first time in years, I wasn't defining myself by what I couldn't afford or what I couldn't provide. I was just Anne, with my own thoughts and opinions and experiences worth sharing. You know, Eleanor said to me over dinner, we're always looking for board members for the foundation. You have such insight into what really matters to working families. A board position. Me. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, except that she was completely serious. I'd be honored to consider it, I replied, and meant it. It was past midnight when I finally returned to my apartment. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, still buzzing from the evening. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. My phone had been silent all day. No Christmas texts from Anthony or the grandchildren. No calls asking me to bring dessert or help clean up. They were having their peaceful Christmas without me, and apparently, they didn't miss me at all. But for the first time, I didn't miss them either. I walked to my computer and opened my investment account again. $8 million. Enough to live any life I wanted. Enough to never have to beg for scraps of affection from people who didn't value what I offered. I thought about Patricia, buying her way into my grandchildren's hearts. About Jessica's dismissive comments about my little apartment and my thrift store finds. About Anthony's assumption that I'd always be there, grateful for whatever crumbs of attention he threw my way. They had no idea who I really was. They'd never bothered to find out. Maybe it was time to show them. The week after Christmas, I did something I'd never done in my 65 years of life. I bought myself a Cartier watch, not because I needed to tell time better, but because I wanted to see how it felt to walk into Tiffany & Co. and buy something beautiful just because I could. The saleswoman's entire demeanor changed when I handed her my black American Express card. Suddenly, I wasn't just another elderly woman browsing. I was a valued customer, worthy of champagne and private consultation rooms. This piece would be perfect for you, she said, fastening a diamond tennis bracelet around my wrist. It's from our new collection. I bought that too. That was just the beginning. By mid-January, I'd hired a personal shopper, a decorator, and a real estate agent. If my family wanted to treat me like I was insignificant, fine. But I was done living like I was insignificant. The apartment I bought was everything my old one wasn't. 2 bedrooms, marble countertops, a view that made people gasp when they walked in. It was in the same building as Margaret and Charles, 3 floors up from my old place. The same building where my son had never once visited me in 5 years. Are you sure about this? Margaret asked when she helped me pick out furniture. It's quite a change. I was sure. For the first time in decades, I was completely sure about something. The transformation wasn't just about money, though. I hired a personal trainer who came to my new home gym 3 times a week. I started seeing a stylist who taught me how to dress for my body, how to carry myself like someone who belonged in the rooms I was now entering. I even hired a chef to come twice a week, not because I couldn't cook, but because I was tired of always being the one serving others. Within 2 months, I was unrecognizable. Not just physically, though the weight training had given me a confidence in my posture I'd never had. It was deeper than that. I moved through the world differently now, like someone who had every right to take up space. Eleanor Astor had been serious about the board position. The Astor Foundation for Educational Excellence met twice a month in a conference room that overlooked the Hudson River. I found myself sitting around a mahogany table with people whose names appeared in Forbes magazine, discussing million-dollar grants like they were grocery lists. Anne brings such a valuable perspective, Eleanor told the group during my 3rd meeting. She understands what it's really like to struggle, to make choices between paying bills and investing in your children's future. They listened when I spoke. Really listened. Not the polite half-attention I'd gotten used to from my family, but genuine interest in what I had to say. When I suggested we fund after-school programs in working-class neighborhoods, the room erupted in enthusiastic discussion. By the end of the meeting, we'd allocated $2 million to the initiative. $2 million. More money than I'd ever dreamed of having access to, and now I was helping decide how to spend it to change lives. My social calendar filled up quickly. Gallery openings, charity galas, private dinner parties in townhouses that had been in families for generations. I was photographed at a museum fundraiser standing next to a tech billionaire and his wife. The caption in the society pages read, "Ann Morrison, philanthropist and foundation board member, discusses literacy initiatives with fellow donors." Philanthropist. I'd become someone worthy of a title. The strangest part was how natural it all felt. Not the money part. That still amazed me every morning when I woke up in silk sheets and Egyptian cotton pajamas. But the respect, the way people sought out my opinions, the assumption that I belonged in these spaces. This was who I'd always been inside, just buried under decades of making myself small. I started traveling. First, a long weekend in Napa Valley with Margaret and Charles, staying at a resort where the cheapest room cost more than I used to spend on groceries in 3 months. Then a week in Paris with Eleanor, staying at a hotel where the staff remembered your coffee preference and the thread count of the sheets was higher than my old apartment's rent. Every experience felt like waking up from a long sleep. In Paris, I bought clothes that made me feel beautiful. In Napa, I learned about wine from a sommelier who treated me like someone whose palate mattered. I was discovering parts of myself I'd never known existed. The photos started appearing on social media in March. Not photos I posted. I barely understood Instagram, but photos my new friends shared. Anne at a charity auction, bidding on a painting. Anne at a wine tasting, laughing with the daughter of a real estate mogul. Anne at a private dinner party, seated between a prominent judge and a successful novelist. In every photo, I looked like someone who belonged, someone with substance and style and stories worth hearing, someone who mattered. I didn't think about Anthony seeing them. I was too busy living my life to worry about who might be watching from the sidelines. But he was watching. They all were. The first sign came in April, a text from Jessica, the first communication I'd had from any of them since Christmas. "Mom Morrison, hope you're doing well. The kids were asking about you." I read it twice, trying to decode the sudden friendliness. Mom Morrison. She'd never called me that before. It had always been Anne at best. Nothing at all most of the time. I didn't respond immediately. I was getting ready for a benefit dinner where I was being honored for my work with the Education Foundation. The dress I'd chosen cost more than I used to spend on Christmas presents for the entire family, and it was worth every penny. I looked like someone who had never begged for a seat at anyone's table. 2 days later, another text from Jessica. "Emma's spring concert is next week. She'd love to see you there." Now that was interesting. Emma's last concert had been in December, right before Christmas. I'd asked Anthony if I could come, and he'd said it was just for immediate family. Now, suddenly, I was being invited. I showed the text to Eleanor over lunch at the Metropolitan Club. "Sounds like someone's been doing some research," she said, raising an eyebrow. "How long since you've heard from them?" "Christmas Eve, when they uninvited me from Christmas dinner." Eleanor's expression hardened. She'd heard this story before, during one of our long conversations about family and loyalty and the difference between the two. "And now they want you back? How convenient." It was convenient. Suspiciously so. That evening, I was having dinner at home when my doorman called up. "Mrs. Morrison, there's a delivery for you." Flowers. The arrangement was elaborate and expensive. White roses and lilies, the kind of display that cost several $100s. The card was signed by Anthony. "Thinking of you, Mom. Love, Anthony, Jessica, Emma, and Jake." I stared at the card for a long time. 6 months of silence and now flowers. Now invitations. Now Mom Morrison instead of just Anne. Something had changed. Something had made them remember I existed. I walked to my laptop and opened Google, typing in my own name for the first time in my life. The results made my breath catch. There I was, in dozens of photos from the past 4 months. Society pages, charity websites, foundation newsletters. Ann Morrison at this event. Ann Morrison at that gala. Ann Morrison, donor and board member and honored guest, and Morrison, who clearly had money. I leaned back in my chair and started to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. They hadn't missed me. They hadn't realized they'd made a mistake excluding me from their lives. They'd realized they'd made a mistake excluding my bank account. The phone started ringing at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in late April. I was in my home gym, halfway through my session with Marcus, my trainer, when the first call came through. I glanced at the screen and saw Anthony's name. I let it go to voicemail. "Mrs. Morrison, you want to take a break?" Marcus asked, noticing my distraction. "No, let's keep going. Whoever it is can wait." But the calls didn't stop. By the time I finished my workout, showered, and sat down for breakfast, my phone showed 17 missed calls, all from Anthony. 17 calls in 2 hours. Whatever had prompted this sudden urgency wasn't good news for him. I poured my coffee and listened to the first voicemail while looking out at the city spread below my windows. The same city I'd always lived in, but now I was seeing it from a very different angle. "Mom, it's Anthony. I really need to talk to you. Can you call me back as soon as you get this? It's important." His voice had an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, asking permission to borrow the car. Nervous. Needy. The second voicemail. "Mom, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I really need to reach you. Please call me back." By the fifth message, the desperation was impossible to miss. "Mom, I saw the photos online, from the charity events. We need to talk. Please, just call me back." So, that was it. He'd finally connected the dots between the society page photos and his suddenly absent mother. The mother he'd discarded so casually 6 months ago was now appearing at galas and foundation meetings, wearing clothes that cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. I set the phone aside and opened my laptop. There had been new photos posted just yesterday from the Literacy Foundation's spring benefit. I'd been seated at the head table, right next to the mayor's wife and a prominent tech entrepreneur. The photographer had captured me mid-laugh at something Eleanor had said, looking completely at ease in a world of influence and wealth. The caption read, "Ann Morrison, major foundation donor and board member, enjoys the evening's festivities. Major donor." That was new, but accurate. I'd written a check for $50,000 that night, barely a dent in my investment account, but enough to fund 3 new after-school programs. The phone rang again. This time I answered. "Hello, Anthony." "Mom." His voice was filled with relief, like he'd been holding his breath. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I was busy. What do you need?" The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. I'd never been direct with Anthony. I'd always been accommodating, understanding, ready to drop everything when he called. We need to talk. Can I come over? I'm not at the old apartment anymore." Silence. "What do you mean?" "I moved. I live in the penthouse now. Same building, different life." Another silence, longer this time. "The penthouse? Mom, those apartments cost." "I know what they cost." I could practically hear him trying to process this information. His mother, who'd clipped coupons and shopped clearance sales, who'd apologized for not being able to afford better Christmas gifts, was living in a penthouse. "Can I come up?" I looked at my calendar. Lunch with Margaret at 1, a foundation planning meeting at 3, dinner with potential donors at 7. My days were full now, filled with purpose and people who valued my time. "I have 30 minutes at 11. When he arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. Anthony had always been handsome, taking after his father with dark hair and strong features, but now he looked worn down, older than his 38 years. His expensive suit, the one Jessica had probably picked out, looked rumpled. There were dark circles under his eyes. He stood in my foyer, staring around at the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the artwork I'd chosen with my decorator's help. His mouth was slightly open, like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. "This is incredible," he finally said. "How did you? When did you? Would you like coffee? My housekeeper made a fresh pot this morning." "You have a housekeeper?" I led him to the living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that real estate agents described as breathtaking. He sank into one of my new leather chairs, still looking around like he'd stepped into someone else's life, which, in a way, He had. Mom, I don't understand. How is this possible? Last Christmas, you were living in that tiny apartment, and now, he gestured helplessly at the surroundings. Now, I'm living the life I can afford. But where did the money come from? I sat across from him, perfectly composed in my tailored jacket and silk blouse, the clothes of a woman who belonged in boardrooms and charity galas. It was always there, Anthony. You just never asked. His face went pale. What do you mean it was always there? I inherited it. 3 years ago, from your great-aunt Helen. Aunt Helen left you money? $8 million. The number hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair, his hand going to his chest like he was having trouble breathing. 8 million. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I took a sip of my coffee, letting the question hang in the air. Tell you what, exactly? That I had money you could borrow? That I could solve all your problems with my checkbook? No, that's not. I mean, he was stumbling over his words, clearly trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that he didn't know how to relate to me anymore. You mean like Patricia does for you and Jessica? His face flushed red. That's different. How is it different? She wants to help. She offers. And I didn't want to help? I didn't mean that. But he had meant it, and we both knew it. He'd meant that Patricia's money came with respect and gratitude, while mine would have come with expectation and obligation. He'd meant that Patricia was someone worth impressing, while I was someone to be managed. The phone on my side table chimed with a text, Margaret confirming our lunch plans. In 2 hours, I'd be sitting in the dining room of one of the city's most exclusive clubs, discussing art acquisitions and vacation plans with women whose opinions actually mattered to the people around them. I need to wrap this up, I said, glancing at my watch. I have appointments. Mom, wait. I came here because Jessica and I are having problems. There it was. The real reason for the desperate phone calls, the sudden interest in reconnecting. Not guilt over how they'd treated me, not genuine affection or regret. Problems that required solutions. Solutions that required money. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it, but I didn't offer to fix it. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. The divorce lawyer wants a $50,000 retainer. My business is struggling. The kids' school fees are due next month. I nodded sympathetically but said nothing. Mom, I know I haven't been the best son lately. I know Christmas was. I know we made mistakes. But I'm asking for your help. I'm family. Family. The word he'd used to exclude me was now the word he was using to claim me. You are family, I agreed. You're also the person who told me not to come to Christmas because you wanted peace. You're the person who never once asked how I was doing in the 6 months since then. You're the person who only called when you found out I had something you needed. His face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I was wrong. We were wrong. Jessica was. She influenced me, and I let her. And I'm sorry. Jessica influenced you to treat your mother like an inconvenience? She thought. She said you were trying to control us, to make us feel guilty. For what? For not needing you anymore. The honesty of it was brutal, not needing me anymore, as if I'd only ever been valuable for what I could provide. And once they'd outgrown that need, I'd become disposable. And now, you need me again. He nodded miserably. I know how it looks. I know I don't deserve your help after how I treated you. But I'm desperate, Mom. I don't know what else to do. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I'll think about it. You'll think about it? I'll consider whether helping you is something I want to do, whether it's good for me, whether it aligns with my values, whether it's how I want to spend my money. He stared at me like I was a stranger, which I supposed I was. I'll be in touch, I said, walking him to the door. After he left, I stood at my window looking down at the street below. Somewhere down there, Anthony was probably sitting in his car, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how his reliable, accommodating mother had become someone who said, I'll think about it, instead of course, honey, whatever you need. The truth was, I had already decided. I just wasn't ready to tell him what that decision was. I let Anthony wait 2 weeks before I called him back. 2 weeks during which my phone rang constantly, Not just from him, but from Jessica too. Then Emma, my 17-year-old granddaughter, calling with tears in her voice about how Daddy was so stressed and Mommy was crying all the time. They were pulling out all the stops, using every emotional weapon they'd never bothered to use when they actually wanted my company. When I finally invited Anthony over again, I made sure the timing sent a message. Saturday afternoon, right after I'd returned from a weekend in the Hamptons with Eleanor and her husband. I was still wearing the linen dress I'd bought for their yacht party, still had salt air in my hair, and the satisfied glow of someone who'd spent 2 days being treated like she mattered. Anthony arrived looking worse than before. The expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. His hair needed cutting, and there was a desperation in his eyes that made him look younger and older at the same time. "Thank you for seeing me," he said as I led him to the living room. "I know you're busy." I was busy, busier than I'd ever been in my life and loving every minute of it. But I didn't tell him that. "Sit down, Anthony. We need to have a conversation." He perched on the edge of the sofa like he was afraid to get comfortable. I took the chair across from him, the same one I'd sat in 2 weeks ago when he'd first learned about my money. "Before we talk about what you need," I said, "I want you to understand something about what I've learned these past few months." He nodded eagerly, like a student hoping to pass a test he hadn't studied for. "I've learned that I spent 40 years of my life making myself smaller so that other people could feel bigger. I worked jobs I hated so you could have opportunities. I lived in apartments I'd outgrown so you could have college funds. I wore clothes that made me invisible so you could shine. Mom, I never asked you to." "No, you didn't ask. You just expected. And I gave because that's what I thought love was. Sacrifice without recognition, service without appreciation." His face was pale, but he didn't interrupt again. "Do you know what I've discovered since Christmas? I've discovered that when people see you as valuable, they treat you as valuable. When they know your time costs something, they don't waste it. When they understand that your attention is a gift, they're grateful to receive it." I leaned forward, making sure he was really listening. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm surrounded by people who want my opinions, who value my experience, who include me because they enjoy my company. Not because they have to, not because I'm paying for the privilege, because they choose to." Anthony's hands were clenched in his lap. "I chose you too, Mom. You're my mother." "No, Anthony. You inherited me. There's a difference." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I watched him process them, saw the moment when he realized I wasn't wrong. "I want to help you," I continued, "but not the way I used to help you. Not by fixing your problems and then pretending it never happened. Not by enabling you to keep making the same mistakes because you know I'll always be there to clean up the mess." "What do you mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Inside were financial documents, legal papers, bank statements, the evidence of a life he'd never bothered to understand. "This is what I mean. For the past 20 years, you've borrowed money from me. Small amounts, usually. 50 here, 200 there. Sometimes larger amounts, like the 5,000 for Emma's school fees. Do you know how much it adds up to?" He shook his head. $47,000. "Over 20 years, you've taken $47,000 from me and never paid back a cent." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "I kept track of every loan, every request, every promise to pay me back. Because I thought someday you'd want to know. Someday you'd ask about it, maybe even try to make it right." I spread the papers out on the coffee table between us. Years of careful record-keeping, documentation of a one-sided financial relationship. But you never asked, because in your mind, it wasn't really borrowing. It was just taking what you needed from someone who didn't matter enough to say no. "Mom, I didn't think. I didn't realize. You didn't think I was keeping track? Or you didn't think it mattered?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I didn't think you minded." Of course I minded, but I'd trained you so well to expect my sacrifice that you stopped seeing it as sacrifice. You saw it as my function. Anna gathered the papers back into the folder, each page a reminder of how little my financial stability had mattered to the people I'd loved most. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to help you with your divorce lawyer. I'm going to pay the $50,000 you need. Relief flooded his face. Mom, thank you. I promise I'll pay you back this time. I swear. No, you won't pay me back, because this isn't a loan. He looked confused. This is severance pay. I'm buying myself out of the obligation to fix your problems. $50,000, and then we're even. No more emergency calls. No more crisis management. No more assuming that my money is your safety net. I don't understand. I'm retiring from being your financial backup plan. After this payment, you handle your own problems like the grown man you are. The relief on his face was quickly replaced by panic. But what if something happens? What if the kids need something, or Jessica? Jessica has her mother for that. Patricia's been your family's ATM for years. I'm sure she'll continue. That's different. Patricia doesn't give us money out of guilt or obligation. Exactly. She gives it because she wants to. Because you've made her feel valued and appreciated. Because you've never taken her generosity for granted. The comparison hung between us like an accusation. He'd treated Patricia's mother-in-law money like a gift, and my mother money like an entitlement. But you're my mother. Yes, and you're 38 years old. Old enough to understand that being someone's child doesn't give you unlimited access to their resources. I could see him struggling to process this new reality. The mother who'd always said yes was learning to say no. The woman who'd never set boundaries was suddenly defining them in very clear terms. There's something else, I said. About Christmas. His face went carefully neutral. What about Christmas? You told me not to come because you wanted a peaceful Christmas with family. But I was family too, Anthony. I was family until it was inconvenient for you. We made a mistake. I know that now. You made a choice. You chose Jessica's comfort over my feelings. You chose your kids' preferences over your mother's inclusion. You chose peace over loyalty. I'm sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo the 6 months I spent wondering what I'd done wrong. Sorry doesn't erase the message you sent that I wasn't welcome in my own family. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. Real tears. Not the manipulative kind he'd used as a child when he wanted something. What can I do to make this right? You can accept that this is how things are now. I'm not the same person I was at Christmas. I'm not someone who begs for inclusion or settles for scraps of affection. I'm someone with choices, and I'm choosing to live differently. Does that mean you don't want me in your life? I looked at him sitting there. This man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally for nearly 4 decades. He looked so young in that moment, so uncertain about where he stood with me. I want you in my life if you want to be in mine. Really in it, not just when you need something. I want you to call because you're curious about how I'm doing, not because you're hoping I can solve a problem. I want you to invite me to things because you enjoy my company, not because you feel obligated. I do enjoy your company. Do you? When's the last time you called just to talk? When's the last time you asked about my interests, my friends, my hopes for the future? He was quiet. I'm not angry anymore, Anthony. I'm just done being taken for granted. Done being treated like I'm lucky to be included in your life instead of the other way around. I stood up, smoothing my dress. I'll have my lawyer transfer the $50,000 to your account this week. After that, we start fresh. You decide what kind of relationship you want with me, and I'll decide if it's the kind of relationship I want too. He stood too, looking lost and uncertain. Can I hug you? I let him, but it felt different than it used to. Less desperate on my part. More grateful on his. I love you, Mom. I love you too. But love isn't enough anymore. I need respect too. After he left, I sat in my beautiful apartment looking out at my beautiful view, and for the first time since Christmas, I felt completely at peace. I was finally free. 6 months after that conversation with Anthony, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. It was Emma, my granddaughter, calling from college. Grandma Anne? I hope I'm not bothering you. You're never bothering me, sweetheart. How are you? I'm good, really good, actually. I wanted to thank you. This was new. In all the years I'd been Emma's grandmother, She'd never called to thank me for anything, not for the birthday gifts, not for the school clothes I'd bought when money was tight, not for the countless times I'd babysat so her parents could have date nights. Thank me for what? For the college fund. Dad told me you set one up for Jake and me. Nobody's ever done anything like that for me before. I smiled, remembering the afternoon I'd spent with my financial advisor, setting up education trusts for both grandchildren. Money they could access for tuition and books and living expenses, but that Anthony couldn't touch. Money that came with no strings attached and no guilt. You're welcome, honey. I want you to have opportunities. It's not just the money, though. It's that you thought about my future. Like, really thought about it. Mom's always so focused on what's happening right now, and Dad's always stressed about work. But you actually planned for something that hasn't happened yet. The observation was so mature, so insightful, that it caught me off guard. When had Emma become this thoughtful young woman? Can I ask you something, Grandma? Of course. Are you happier now? The question surprised me. What do you mean? Dad says you're different since you moved to the penthouse. He says you're more independent. And when I saw those pictures from your charity events, you looked so happy. Like, genuinely happy. I don't remember seeing you look like that before. I thought about how to answer. Emma was 19 now, old enough for honesty. I am happier. I'm living the life I want instead of the life other people expected me to live. Is that why you don't come to family dinners anymore? There it was. The question I'd been waiting for someone to ask. I don't come because I'm not invited the right way anymore. What do you mean? I poured my coffee and sat down, settling in for what felt like an important conversation. For years, I was invited to family events as the help. Come early to cook, stay late to clean, bring something homemade because your other grandmother was bringing something expensive. I was included, but not really welcome. Emma was quiet, and I could picture her processing this information. But that changed? I changed. I decided I'd rather spend my holidays with people who actually want me there than with people who tolerate me there. Do you think we tolerated you? The vulnerability in her voice broke my heart a little. Not you, sweetheart. You were a child. You didn't have a choice about how adults treated each other. But now I do have a choice. I'm calling because I want to see you. Not because Mom told me to, not because it's a holiday, because I miss you. That night, Emma came to my apartment for dinner. Not a family dinner with all the complicated dynamics and old resentments. Just the two of us getting to know each other as adults. She told me about her classes, her friends, her plans for after graduation. I told her about the foundation work, about my travels, about the art classes I'd started taking. We talked for hours, the way I'd always hoped we would but never had when every interaction was filtered through her parents' expectations. Grandma, can I say something that might sound weird? Sure. I think you're cooler now than you've ever been. I laughed. Cooler? You have this confidence, like you know who you are and you're not apologizing for it. When I was little, you always seemed like you were trying to make everyone else happy. Now you seem like you're trying to make yourself happy. Is that bad? Are you kidding? It's amazing. I want to be like that when I'm your age. When Emma left that night, she hugged me tighter than she had since she was small. Can we do this again? Just us? Anytime you want. 2 weeks later, Jake called. My younger grandson, now 16 and apparently capable of more insight than I'd given him credit for. Grandma Ann, Dad says you might not come to Christmas again this year. That's right. Can I ask why? I explained it the same way I had to Emma. About being wanted versus being tolerated. About choosing to spend my time with people who valued it. What if I wanted you there? Like, really wanted you there? Not just because Mom says family should be together? Then we'll figure out a way to celebrate together. Maybe not on Christmas Day, but our own celebration. Would you teach me to cook? That stuffing you used to make? Of course. So Jake started coming over every other Saturday. We'd cook together, and I'd tell him stories about his father as a child, about his grandfather he'd never met, about the family history no one else seemed interested in preserving. He was a good kid, just caught in the middle of adult complications he'd had no part in creating. The real surprise came in November. Anthony called, and for once, it wasn't because he needed something. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas." I braced myself for another plea, another attempt to guilt me into participating in their version of family harmony. "I know you're not coming to our house, and I understand why. But I was wondering, would you be okay if I came to see you? Just me on Christmas morning? Before all the chaos starts?" The request was so unexpected that I didn't answer right away. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just want to spend some time with my mother, if you'll have me." "What about Jessica?" "Jessica and I are working on our relationship. Part of that work involves me learning to maintain relationships that matter to me, regardless of whether they fit into her plan for how things should be." It was the most mature thing I'd ever heard him say. "I'd like that," I told him. Christmas morning, Anthony arrived at 10 with a thermos of coffee and a bag of pastries from my favorite bakery. The bakery I'd mentioned loving once, months ago, in passing. He'd remembered. We sat in my living room, looking out at the snow falling over the city, and talked. Really talked. He asked about my foundation work, about my travels, about the art classes Emma had mentioned. I asked about his business, his marriage, his hopes for the new year. "I owe you an apology," he said as he was getting ready to leave. "You've apologized, not for Christmas last year. Well, yes, for that too, but for all the years before that. For treating your generosity like it was my right. For taking your love for granted. For never seeing you as a person with your own dreams and needs. What changed? Watching you live differently. Seeing how happy you are when you're not constantly trying to take care of everyone else. I realized I'd never even wondered what would make you happy. And now? Now I can see it. You're happier than I've ever seen you, and I'm proud of you for choosing yourself." After he left, I sat in my beautiful apartment, surrounded by the life I'd built for myself, and felt something I'd never felt before, complete contentment. My phone buzzed with messages throughout the day. Emma, sending pictures from her volunteer work at a homeless shelter, Jake, showing off the dinner he'd cooked using one of my recipes, Margaret and Charles, inviting me to join them for champagne later, people who chose to include me in their lives because they wanted me there. That evening, I stood on my balcony looking out over the city lights, wearing a cashmere robe that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month, and I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the woman who'd accepted exclusion as the price of peace, who'd made herself small so others could feel big. She was gone now, replaced by someone who understood her own worth, someone who knew the difference between being loved and being used, someone who had learned that the best relationships are chosen, not inherited. My phone rang. Eleanor, calling from her vacation home in Aspen. "Anne, darling, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. I wanted to let you know that the foundation board voted yesterday. We'd like you to chair the education committee next year." Chair the committee. Me leading meetings, making decisions that would affect thousands of children's futures. I'd be honored. Wonderful. Oh, and Richard and I are having a small dinner party when we get back. Just 8 or 10 people, very intimate. You simply must come. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it in a toast to the empty apartment, to the life I'd chosen, to the woman I'd become. "Here's to new beginnings," I said aloud. And somewhere in the city below, my family was learning to miss me properly, learning to value what I offered instead of taking it for granted. Learning that love without respect isn't really love at all. I'd given them the greatest gift I could, the opportunity to choose me freely, without obligation or guilt. Some of them were rising to the occasion. Others weren't. But for the first time in my life, that was their choice to make, not mine. I was finally, completely, beautifully free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.